Reagan succeeded brilliantly in fashioning a coalition. And I want to talk about the two great unifying individuals in this conservative coalition. The golden age I'm talking about, and this rise out of the ash heap of liberalism. The first great unifier of the conservative movement came on the scene nationally exactly 52 years ago this month. In the first issue of a magazine you know, it's called National Review. And in that first issue, William F. Buckley said, the purpose of this magazine, in this time, in this place, is to stand athwart history, yelling, stop. I'm quoting, stand athwart history, yelling, stop. In other words, don't just buy the progressive impulse, the liberal impulse to ever be looking forward. These strengths of ours come from standing on the shoulders of giants. What is it from the past? The whole thesis to this point. And Buckley, the pamphleteer, was going to dedicate himself to exploring those strengths and applying those principles that we talked about to particular political problems. He was a unifier because he brought together three groups of people who were looking for a leader, and Buckley was their leader. He brought together the anti-communists, this after the McCarthy era. He brought together the libertarians, and he brought together traditionalist Catholics, because he himself was a traditionalist Catholic, with strong libertarian instincts and viscerally anti-communist. There was a second great unifier to the conservative movement, and he shows up about 25 years later, 25 years later, in Ronald Reagan. Because not only did Ronald Reagan, the politician, build on the pamphleteer of William F. Buckley, Ronald Reagan said, we're going to bring in even more groups, two more groups in particular, to join the three groups that are part of this coalition. So Ronald Reagan's able to take advantage, because of the pages of National Review, essentially, of he has the anti-communists, the libertarians, and he has the traditionalist Catholics. And Ronald Reagan is going to add to them the neocons. Now, I'm going to use this word in somewhat of a technical sense. You've heard a lot of nonsense about what a neocon is. The original neocons were Jewish writers, specifically the founding of Commentary magazine. These guys were writing mostly in New York City, and in the 1960s they were very prominent. You have to understand this cadre of men and women. Norman Podhoretz, for example, Irving Kristol, their spouses, Midge Decter. These men and women started out when they were college students at the City University of New York. They were Stalinists. They basically were communist apologists. And they, being far to the left, they slowly got mugged by reality, as they say, and became more and more conservative. But not what you would call conservative yet, until the new left went nuts in the 1960s. And when you have, in New York City, Hamilton Hall at Columbia University there is one of the great halls in New York City. I've had the privilege of lecturing there. Hamilton Hall, this storied place, this icon, it's where Alexander Hamilton himself had been. This icon of higher education. And you have students, thugs, going in and occupying the administration and taking over classrooms and killing free speech. Basically, the new left was behaving this way, and Podhoretz and Kristol and Decter and Gertrude Himmelfarb, these men and women, these Jewish intellectuals, said, enough. We have nothing in common with this nonsense, this silliness. This is debasing political currency. And so, of course, National Review is it's on 36th Street in Manhattan, and so Buckley said, come on over. He cultivated them, and sure enough, they became part of the coalition. The neocons did. That's what the neocons really were, the former Stalinists who did this huge pilgrimage. When I was in grad school at Michigan, one of the most interesting things I learned about intellectual history is one of my professors there, David Honger, said, why do people change their minds? It's one of the most fascinating questions you can ask. There's just a study, a sociological study within the conservative movement. How do you take a Stalinist and 25 years later turn them into the neocon? It's a fascinating journey. And I hope in the course of your year studying that you will be able to start to answer that question. One other group, a fifth group, will round out this coalition. The fifth group is the evangelicals. Now, Jimmy Carter, it was a Democrat who made the evangelicals become a group that was prominent on the radar screen. And it's an interesting phenomenon because after the Scopes trial in 1925, many Protestant evangelicals went underground. They were tired of being lampooned by the likes of H.L. Mencken, the Baltimore Sun, and pages of the popular press. They said, we're going to worry about our own salvation. We're not going to try to save the world. But Roe v. Wade, January 22nd, 1973, Roe v. Wade activated, energized the evangelical Protestants. And while Carter was able to bring it political life force, it was Reagan with whom they really found a home. And so they became the fifth part of this great coalition that helped Reagan achieve what he achieved and then helped elect George H.W. Bush in 1988. And it expressed itself, even through the 1990s. It expressed itself in a couple of different ways. The 104th Congress, when Newt Gingrich and all those Republicans take over Congress in 1994, that dramatic November night, it was the contract with America. You had really an elucidation of Reagan's principles in the 1990s. And then, of course, because my political life is the product of John Engler, he's my mentor in the political marketplace. John Engler and about 30 other Republican governors expressed Reaganism at the state level. And it was a wonderful impulse to see unfold as we argued. And even a lot of Democratic governors came over to really a Reagan philosophy. And the ones that didn't, like Mario Cuomo, was defeated in 1994. So when the Democrats in the House and the Senate were thrown out, a lot of Democratic governors who'd been more liberal were also thrown out because the country was supporting Reaganism, Reagan's ideas. So that, in brief, is how the Golden Age came about and how it ended up expressing itself in a president, in Congress, and in state houses, and governor's mansions across the country, until recently. That's what I started with. So I have a encapsulation. Let me conclude with talking about renewal. What are the sources of renewal? Where do we go from here? Ideally toward another golden age, but there's no guarantee of that. Maybe in this room is somebody who will, lead conservatives out of the wilderness, at least locally, maybe at the state level, maybe regionally. What are the sources of renewal? I want to go through three of them briefly.